Hi, today I'm interviewing Rochelle Swanson running for District 5. So Ms. Swanson, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rochelle Swanson. I'm running for District 5. I've lived in Davis nearly 30 years, moved here to go to UC Davis, and never left. So I've, started here in South Davis, lived here for a long time, bought my first house here, spent a little time in West Davis, and then moved back here a number of years ago. I have three sons, my youngest who is 18, who all went through the schools here and graduated and have moving on into the world. I served on Davis City Council from 2010 to 2018 and stepped down to really focus on my youngest son as he finished up high school. He just graduated this past June. As we came through, the pandemic hitting and then the economy failing, I had a number of folks ask me if I would consider coming back to serve on city council, as I had been elected in 2010 to help guide the city through the recession and get through the recovery. And so I agreed and put myself out there and, to be able to give voters an opportunity to have a voice of experience. Nobody on the current council or within executive management, the city went through the last recession. And there are a lot of moving pieces that happen. And, even now, what's similar but yet different is also the impact that's happening in both the state and federal government. And that will have a significant impact here in Davis. And so I love this community and wanted to make sure that voters had a choice to have somebody with experience from District 5.
Yeah, so I guess you pretty much answered my first question then. So what makes you so what makes you the best candidate for District 5?
Um, Experience is part of it, certainly. I mean, obviously 8 years on council, but I have far more experience than that. I've definitely did a lot of community work here, lived here for a very long time. I've lived in two parts of Davis, so I do understand that sometimes that South Davis doesn't quite get the representation that a lot of people feel that we deserve. I am an attorney by education, and with experience, I am a recognized leader throughout the region. I started my consulting business while I was in law school over 20 years ago. I've just recently really moved more into a private role, but always, been focused on communities and how they work together. And so I really understand and am quite successful actually on public-private partnerships, as well as collaboration between local, county, state, and federal government. And that is why, if you note my endorsements, I have every sitting council member, every trustee from the school board, the assembly member, the Senate, and the supermajority of the board of supervisors. And I know some would say that that's just because of popularity or name recognition. But in fact, when you get into elected office, you do not easily give away an endorsement, because your name actually goes with that endorsement. And as you can see from all the quotes on my website, all these leaders, including past leaders, know the difficult situation that we're going to be in. And it's going to be more than just a one issue area. And so that's, really in many ways why I believe that I am the strongest candidate from just a regular council perspective. And then some of the nuances that we have coming up now, which I'm so happy to see. So I have three sons, and two of whom are Black. And are having a conversation finally that is going beyond just the moment. Often if you look, through the last couple of decades, there's definitely been times when this issue about police brutality has come up, unequal treatment. And then it goes through a couple of election cycles. What was so heartening for me this time around is it wasn't just a couple of cities in the United States. It was cities across the world that was joining with the United States to do a better job about treating all of its citizens with equality. So I know what it is to have the talk with my children about being safe and what happens if you get pulled over, and understanding that people may follow you or treat you differently. And I think that that's a voice that's really needed on the council. It's something that I brought before and now want to bring again.
So you mentioned that there wasn't a lot of representation on the city council from South Davis. Do you think that the new district election system works to solve that?
I think it will. I think it will help. The reality is this is the first district election, so it might be early to tell. I can tell you that because I lived in South Davis for part of the time that I was on council last time, and often I would raise specific issues. So if we were talking about parking, I would try to remind my colleagues that not everybody lives in the core. Not everybody can jump on their bicycle. You've got young families. You may have people with limited mobility. You have seniors. you want to come downtown, right, and shop and get everything. Well, you're probably going to drive. And I would often try to bring those messages, and sometimes they would resonate and often they wouldn't. The difference, I think, between then and now is that when you're coming from a district, you get to speak with a little more authority about really being an equal of five. Instead of before, I kind of felt like it was, kind of this more a minority, like, okay, there are some people that's an issue for. So I really believe that is an improvement. But again, we won't know, right, until we get through these first elections and really see how it works. But I think the beauty is, while there's a lot of opportunity from representation from the district, I also like that, to a candidate, everybody also recognizes we represent all of Davis. And I think that remains very important because a lot of the issues, from South Davis, they're also echoed in East Davis or West Davis. But, I mean, we certainly have areas where the investment, I think, could be better here. And so I'm eager to see how it works. I understood when it first came up, and that's why I supported it, because you certainly have, if you really follow council of the last probably 2 decades, you will see a preponderance of the usual active people who are always part of council meetings and are very vocal and involved. They tend not to be fully representative of the city.
Okay, so one of the biggest issues on or bills on the ballot this year is Measure B, which is the Mace development. So obviously coming from District 5, that's going to have a big impact on your district, not only with traffic, but in like environmentally and with economically. So what are your thoughts on Measure B?
So my thoughts on Measure B is, well, first off, to be fully transparent, I support it. And I do understand what some of the impacts are. So to give you a little more history of me, so I, was following what was happening with our business park land study, because we've always been under when it comes to jobs. We tend to have the bulk of our jobs all concentrated at the university. And that makes us very susceptible to things like a recession, where you have, people being furloughed. And, when you've got such a huge number of people from one employer, again, it just puts you at risk. And then I sat on the Innovation Park Task Force, and then we looked at, at least 3, maybe 4 different areas of town where we could really look at being able to be more open to having companies land here. And it's not just about companies landing here, it's about growing companies out of the university. I noticed more and more, so when I graduated in the mid 90s, there's a lot of people we could actually choose to stay in Davis. You don't see that as much anymore. And part of that, it's a lack of jobs. Housing has become a lot more expensive. And so you have those pieces that come together. Then you also have a lot of folks that end up commuting to the Bay Area. I've mostly worked from home throughout my career, but a lot of it has been in the Bay Area. So I'm down there, relatively often. And so we do need to bring some jobs here and keep some companies here. We've had some companies that we lost because they said that they did not have anywhere to go. Bear was one of those ones, ended up in West Sacramento. And so I share that history to give a little more flavors why I support B. So I also was a founding board member of the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. I currently sit on, on committees, both the Bay Area Council, the Chamber, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and Greater Sacramento Economic Council. I've remained involved with them, and there's been a constant refrain about Davis, people wanting to be in Davis, be close to the university, but there's not a place for it. So that's one piece of why I support B. Another part is that we are the University of California, Davis, and we are the #1 ag school in the country, and often the #1 ag school or #2 in the world. And we need to be able to do our part to figure out how we're going to approach agriculture and be more sustainable. So yes, there are greenhouse gas emissions that are being attributed to traffic at full build out, but there's no offsets for the fact that agriculture, excluding animal husbandry and cows, just from crops itself, accounts for about 26% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And so I do believe that part of that research will be able to also, how do we are more sustainable with the soil? And that requires that level of proximity. And from the traffic point of view, there are a lot of traffic mitigation measures that are proposed within this project. If elected, I'm going to be extremely active in what they're doing for the master planning of the access that is there. I think we could be even more creative. I think we need to approach Union Pacific as well as Amtrak about, maybe another station What does that look like to also have good transit within the city that doesn't rely on cars? I think the other piece is, I mean, the governor, put out an order for all electric by 2035, at least what's being sold here. So we're also going to see a reduction there from impacts that's coming from traffic. But then I think there's something even more salient than that is when you look at our revenues, our schools survive on parcel taxes. Our streets and some of our green belts are in very bad disrepair. A couple of years ago, we tried to put a tax on the ballot to pay for that because for decades there was not maintenance that was done to our roads, and we just started investing in that in the early 2010s. And the other thing that this project brings is upfront revenues because of construction, and then long-term revenues that move forward. And I just believe that most people would rather sit in their car for another minute or two than to watch their house prices continue to rise. They can't afford to live here and see their expenses go up. And then the last element is also just about equity and about providing a better diversity of jobs, because not everybody can work at the university. And one of the metrics they look like when you look at an innovation park, for every job that's created there tends to be a factor of 3. So if you have somebody that is working there that is making a very good wage, that is in a successful startup company now that has moved in to being a regular business, they're also more likely to stay here, and they're going to shop and they're going to live here. If they don't live here, they're going to stay here and eat. And that provides, more jobs, whether it's restaurants or other service industry jobs, and then all the way down to, just different amenities that we're able to access, not to mention just more vibrancy in general from having that diversity coming out of the university. So it's a yes, but it's for a lot of those reasons. If I didn't believe that those were present in this project, then I wouldn't support it. I'm a big supporter of the fact that we have Measure D, we had Measure R. I voted for Measure J, back many years ago. And so that's, being able to take care of our agricultural land is very important to me. But I really believe at this point, this is an investment of a couple hundred acres that can really actually go into making a difference, both in the green economy, but as well as agriculture.
Okay, so my next question is actually about police reform. So in week of everything that's been happening this year, police reform has been a big issue among, nationwide. So do you think that the Davis Police Department needs more transparency and accountability? And if so, what would you propose?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. And I think part of it is, just transparency in government is the right way to go. I think, I was part of the council that did the police oversight committee, and I support that decision. I think it's good for folks to understand exactly how public safety works. I think that we could do even better than we have now. We have one officer who is trained in crisis intervention training, and we're paying about $60,000 a year as part of a grant with the county as well. I think that we should have more officers. We have a few unfilled positions. I would be supportive of those being filled by clinicians that are crisis intervention training, that would also not just be on the job all the time for providing training, everything from implicit bias to de-escalating more domestic situations to mental health counseling, and being able to really, go from everything being a law enforcement answer to actually being a public safety answer. But I've spent the last couple of months actually engaging in a number of mental health professionals, both at the county, here at CommuniCare, but also in Sacramento, and people who have worked in other parts of the country, that when you have that kind of a model in your police department, it also helps to start actually changing the overall culture and how you approach things. And so I would be a proponent of having a big community-wide conversation about some of the changes that we want to see. I think we should be having these conversations at the council level and with the community, and not just at the commission level. I think that there needs to be more voices than those that are there now. People who have lived here for a long time that may not be politically active. I know my sons have shared with me that they don't feel that their voices are being heard, and their experience growing up Black in Davis isn't necessarily represented, because it is a spectrum. They've had good experiences, they've had, experiences where, it could go better. And that's not just here. So they also have that comparison of, spending time in other communities. So I do think we could do greater transparency, have the reports. Recently, there was a report that looked at data and about arrests and how it affected people of color. and what the numbers are. And I really believe that we need to bring that and have a full conversation, not about what the data is, but what does it mean? What is the impact to the communities? Is there something underlying there that we could do to help prevent it? Because often that's a symptom and not a cause. And to figure out, are these people that within the community? Are these students? Are there multiple reasons why somebody's getting pulled over? Are there certain parts of town where this is an issue more than others? What are all the different factors that are going into it? And what can we do to mitigate that people of color are, disproportionately pulled over and disproportionately engaging in law enforcement and maybe not having the best outcome? And clearly that's an issue around the country. But I also hear from a lot of folks that feel very good about the improvements that have already been made at the police department. Not that everything's perfect, that definitely, I think we can always strive to do better. And I think it's admirable for Davis to try to be, an example, a pilot for best practices.
So you mentioned, I guess, implicit bias in the police system. Davis is a town with a very high demographic of white people compared to other races. And as we look at local government, we see that that's also reflected in candidates in local government. If you're elected, how do you plan to integrate minorities and marginalized communities? Because I guess, if you look at the candidates, there isn't much representation there.
There's not. There's not. In fact, I've had a number of people shocked that there's not more women on council. And so that's just gender, gender, let alone being able to get more racial equality. And it's not even just racial, it's also cultural equality. I mean, with the university, I remember at one time when I was at UC Davis, there was like up to 180 countries, right, that were represented. It was a data point that came out of iHouse. And so, for me, it's what I'm already doing now. Like, do it in my life, but also in my campaign, is I made sure that I reached out and I have women of color that work actively on my campaign. As I've been talking to folks, I've been, saying I would like to build a task force in South Davis as an example of what we can do to have representation. I think that being able to look even across our commissions and being able to appoint people from the different districts and proactively look and make sure that all different parts of the community are also being addressed. So if you look at the demographics of South Davis, we tend to be a little more diverse than others. And I think that we should look at that. We have a very robust South Asian culture here. We have a robust Latinx culture here. And I think that should also be reflected within our commission. So it's more than just a council seat. It's really our overall structure. And that's going to take even more intent than what we have now. Because what concerns me even now is seeing, a lot of fracturing and, even within where people identify politically, the different nonprofit groups that are there. And I think, we need to decide as a community, where do we want things to move to and what makes people feel comfortable? Because I have had so many people share with me that they want to be involved, but they don't feel comfortable. They feel like, there's a lot of loud voices that are there, and they want to come and represent from the community perspective and not necessarily from a political perspective. And I think that's a really important point that needs to be raised up and discussed more often, because I think that leaves a lot of people out of the conversation because they have this perception that you need to be politically active to be involved. And I really feel firmly that, if you're a community member and you want to be a part of what do the parks look like? What do the streets look like? What kind of programming do we have downtown? That they need to feel that they're welcome to do that. And it's going to take more than one single council member. But I have already made a commitment, that if I'm elected, that I'm going to, reboot a mentoring program to make sure, especially youth that want to be involved. But I want to be careful and not make it seem that you can only, be involved and volunteer if you're at UC Davis, because that's another, fallacy, right? Everybody who's here 18 to 24 must be going to UC Davis. And that's not true, And so those are some of the ideas that I have to be able to make a difference.
So we're going to move on to the youth. So statistics show that the youth is actually the least active voting group in the United States in midterms and general elections and presidential elections. So why do you think that is?
Couple of things. I think, when you're at that age, especially 18 to 24, 18 to 22, if you're in school, you're concentrated on school, right? Or you're working in your job, and oftentimes more than not, you're kind of living month to month, year to year, and so you're really living in the present. I mean, I remember what it was like to be at that age. So that's part of it. Part of it is this sense of relevancy. So I was 20 when Rock the Vote started, and so it was cool to be politically active. I switched from a history major to a political science major in undergrad, and it did have an impact. And I've seen a lessening of that. I mean, there certainly are activists who are younger, but that level of campaign. And so I think part of it that is missing is demonstrating why it's important, because the people who are sitting in office now are going to be impacting policies for maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so when you're in that younger age group, often you're not thinking about, well, what's the impact of policies for me to buy a house? What are the impact of who I elect in me getting a job after college? And those connections haven't been made as strong as they can be. And so I think part of it, like what you guys are doing, right? You're getting active, you're putting it out there. I would be thrilled to bring back having more than just a day in youth and government. There, the school board used to have it to where there was a student who actually was there. They're a non-voting ex officio member. When I was first elected, there was talk about even doing that with a student, and I was shocked and dismayed how many people shot that down immediately. I don't know what that fear is about having a younger vote. So I think I think the biggest part of it is being separate. But I will say what I'm heartened by that I see changing. I see my own sons. I mean, I have an 18-year-old, a 25-year-old, and a 30-year-old. So this election, we got Blaze Pizza, we sat at the table, we filled out our ballots together, and we've tended to do that now. Granted, poli-sci major, went to law school, I've been pretty active. But even for them growing up with that kind of activity, again, even they will feel sometimes, what's the point? And so you've got to be able to pull that together of the point is, or the policies that you're living with make a difference of who's sitting in office. And I think maybe some of the differences too, so when Rock the Vote, came out, I mean, it was still on TV, it was very big in VH1. And so there was this common connective tissue between everybody that you would go to get your information and your news. But now, you've got 6, 7, 15 different social media platforms, right? And often things are very much an echo chamber. Not a lot of trust in the mainstream media. And so you don't necessarily have that avenue of somebody who's not looking for a connection to find the connection. And so I think what it's really going to take is having leaders who are youthful. I mean, look at Greta Grunberg, right, with climate change, is being able to make sure that there are young voices and young leaders that are out there who are willing to do the outreach. And then I think for the leaders that are in office at every level, to really engage and bring in those voices and show them why it matters. So oftentimes when I'll pick something like a parcel tax, for instance, right, and with the school board. And so when you're talking to people who no longer have kids, you talk about, well, the vibrancy of the community depends upon good schools. It's not going to impact you directly because of having kids, but having more families, more children is a more vibrant community. And so I think being able to look at ways that have something very similar. So for instance, who's sitting on council, right? So if you're a renter, you would hope it was somebody who's rented. I know for me, I know what it was like as a student. I still remember, 1.5 months. I mean, 75, I think, percent at one point of the income that was coming in went to rent. So I understand when I hear, young people talking about that, and it was heartbreaking to see the homelessness of the students. And I was very proud for the votes that I made for more housing that would help to be able to alleviate that. And so I think that's it. And I know that's a long answer, because it's not an easy answer. It's because you also have to figure out, what is it that charges somebody to get them active. And as silly as it sounds, Bill Clinton playing the saxophone got people to pay attention and then, listen to the rest of what he said. And so I think folks being able to have that kind of engagement that really care about youth will make a difference. And I'm eager to see what the demographics come out of this election, just because millennials are such a large voting bloc. And if that demographic votes, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the outcomes.
So, have you altered your campaign to, I guess, advertise or promote yourself to the youth?
Yeah, well, it helps. My deputy campaign manager is in her early 20s. And so she's been great. I've used every platform. I've done the texting, definitely did phone calls. I think texting is actually seems to be a lot better. Being able to talk about some of the issues that students live with, especially around affordable housing, is being able to do that. COVID makes it very difficult. Um, I made a commitment early on because every medical professional I talked to said, do not go door to door. That's irresponsible with this current environment. So that definitely made it a little more challenging. And then there's not as many students. So when at the beginning of the election, I called around and tried to reach most of the apartment complex managers, talked to a few of them. Of course, most of them are also not living on site, and you go to a voicemail. So it's still, I think, a challenge. I did reach out and text some of the folks at ASUCD. And, I mean, there was some activity I had before, but now because my kids have graduated, not as close as I would like it be, because before council, I was in a leadership role at the Blue and White Foundation for a number of years. And so that was always also a good avenue. But with COVID, yeah, it's definitely made it more difficult to be able to do that outreach.
All right. So my last question, as a senior in high school, especially after talking to some of my peers, we feel like there's a big divide between, being a student at the high school or middle school and local politics, whether that's city council, whether that's even knowing who your mayor is. Um, so if you're elected, how will you work to incorporate and inform the youth in any decisions you make?
I will reach out to the hub, and I know there's talk about potentially doing a section that's more focused on local politics. I would definitely support that. I would like to see a little more engagement if possible, and maybe because of this format, right, with Zoom, instead of having to sit through hours and hours of a council meeting, being to be able to go back and look at a recording. I will open up having part of the internships to the high school and not just to the college, and then also just reaching out to the administration and see what other programs are available. I would like to be able to see maybe something that grows beyond just student government. I know that so the racial and social justice class first started when my oldest was still at Davis High. And I know during that first inaugural class, they did get involved in local politics. And so I would like to, and then I noticed my youngest son took it just a couple of years ago, and it didn't seem to be as engaged as it had been in the past. And so I would like to also reach out to those teachers and see, is there an opportunity there to incorporate high school students, as well as even some of the city college students, and really kind of grow beyond just UC Davis. But regardless, always, want to be engaged. And if I ever get an outreach, will be responsive. And I know I definitely have probably used my social media more than any other platform this time because of COVID. I mean, I've used it in the past. But that's good to know. And I'm glad that you asked that question, because I will be more intentional and thoughtful to make sure of looking at that demographic. What's tough, and I don't know why, well, maybe it's just because of age and majority laws, but the cutoff when you're doing any kind of outreach on Facebook is 18. Like you can't do it younger than that. So, I'm not sure. You're right. It would probably take like a liaison who would be part of working. So when I was first elected, actually both times I had interns that worked with me afterwards. They had worked on my campaign. And all three of my campaigns had younger people working on them. So maybe that would be a good avenue too, is to have somebody that's a high school student be actively involved, maybe a few hours a week, and they can be that conduit. I think it'd be cool, especially kind of looking at the roots of Rock the Vote, is there being like a concert that maybe even raises money for raising awareness. That's something we did with Blue and White, is we would do a big concert at the golf course to raise money for student programs. But I could see totally putting together a concert to rock the vote. Yeah. So I was excited when I got the email to see that is still active.
Yeah, it's really
Did you
cool
have
to
any
do.
other questions?
Actually,
Yeah, no, it's
that was my
great.
last question. But if you have any parting comments to anyone that may be watching.
Yeah, well, no, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to engage with more people in the community. I'm excited at the potential of being able to bring all my skills and experience back to the dais, and be able to leverage a lot of the regional relationships that I have, and the ones that I even work on during my day job, advocating for broadband and bridging the digital divide, because I think that it's really important. And I think that this is a unique opportunity with the pandemic, that while a lot of people are divided in the day-to-day, I think these digital formats is an opportunity to bring people closer together. And, if I'm elected, I'm going to advocate that we continue to have these kinds of formats for engagement, so that people who are at home or traveling and they want to continue to be engaged in local government and in their community have an easy platform and access to remain engaged. So thank you for the opportunity to share my positions. I genuinely appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for the interview.
Please vote.
Yeah.
Oh, and if I may, my website, to learn more, you can go to my website, which is Rochelle, ROCHELLE, the number 4, Davis.org. And again, thank you.
Yeah, of course.